my June book roundup. I'm going to share with you short reviews and ratings for the 9 books that I read this month. As I read in a wide variety of genres, I will group them by genre and put chapters below. So if there's a certain genre you want to skip to or a certain genre you just want to skip, you can go ahead and do so. Just make sure you go to the end and catch my book of the month because it's one for the ages. It's probably a top 15 book of all time for me. Absolutely blew me away. Let's go ahead and get started this month in the fantasy genre. I'm going to start with Shaman's Crossing by Robin Hobb. Now, you know my love for Robin Hobb. She is my favorite fantasy author. I think when I gave my favorite authors list, she was number 2 of all time for me. I just adore this writer. And there's so much of this that I love. This is just one of those stories that didn't quite live up to my expectations for this author. She's so skilled, though. I mean, I said in my review in Goodreads that she could write a 600-page book on paint drying, and I'd probably read it because it would be so well written. And that's true with this. I just connect so much with her writing style. She takes her time, and she explores character and just does the things that I value most as a reader. But this one tested my patience a bit because she took her time quite a bit. However, the main character, Navarre, I found just not very compelling. And this is a first-person narrative. And it really made it tough to really love this book because Navarre inherently is one of those characters that is almost paralyzed by indecision. One of those characters that just will not make a decision. In fact, the first scene in the book is the only time in the entire book that I feel like this character takes a stand and does something. And it's really hard to follow that. As fantasy readers, we like to follow the heroes. We like to follow the people that take control of situations, even if they do things wrong. We like those characters that have action, and this was not that. So it was really tough. And additionally, I felt that because I wasn't wholly invested in Navarre as a character, that it tainted my view of a lot of the other characters, because again, it was a first-person narrative. So it was a disappointment for me. This is the lowest rated book I've rated of anything by Robin Hobb. I gave Shaman's Crossing 3 stars. I am looking forward to continuing the series. Hobb generally continues to get better in just about every one of her series that I've read of her. So I hope that Forest Mage will improve my thoughts on this series. But as a whole, Shaman's Crossing, just a 3 out of 5. Another work of fantasy I read this month was from this awesome omnibus of I always say Melnibone right, but I never say Elric right. Something with the L and the R, I always screw it up. And this Elric of Melnibone omnibus, Stormbringer. I love this cover art and the color. Normally it's up here as a nice backdrop, but in this Stormbringer omnibus of these 4 books, the first one is The Vanishing Tower, and that's what I read this month. Really enjoyed it. One thing I'm liking with these Elric stories as they go chronologically is they get a little darker, and we start to see just more of the character in general. Additionally, we start to see some of his multiverse implications, which I like, and that was an intriguing part of this. But on the flip side, the one thing I continue to not enjoy about these is that they're a bit disjunct, because so many of these stories, what Moorcock did was he took short stories or novellas and kind of combined them into a novel. So in the case of this one, it's in 3 parts, and the third part just felt a bit out of place from the rest of it. And that's what I felt with most of these. But I'm really loving Elric as a character. I like just the dark tinges of this storytelling, and I like how concise these are. You know, it just shows that you can tell a great story in just a couple hundred pages. So The Vanishing Tower by Michael Moorcock, I gave that one a 4 out of 5. Up next, another work of classic fantasy, and that is The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis. This is the finale of the Chronicles of Narnia, the 7th book of that series. So let me just kind of sum that up as well. I really enjoyed reading these Narnia books. I enjoyed them a lot more as an adult than I did as a kid. And I think one thing is just my expectations were in the right place. As a kid, I think I was looking for more action and adventure and not so much of just kind of the whimsical nature of these stories. Additionally, as a precocious 6th grader, I was looking for something more adult, and this kind of skews young. And at the time, I didn't love these stories. I read Tolkien right after it, and that's exactly what I was looking for at the time. But I think as an adult, going in knowing what these stories are all about and that they're not trying to be Tolkien or any of these works of epic fantasy, I think having those expectations in the correct place allowed me to enjoy them quite a bit. Now, The Last Battle wasn't my favorite of the 7. It's probably in the middle, like 4th or 5th favorite, but it was still very good. And I felt the very end, especially the last chapter, was simply beautiful. It was a great capstone to this Narnia journey that I've went through over the last 6 months, and I'm so glad that I reread these books. The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. All right, one final book in the fantasy genre this month was a book called No Heart for a Thief by James Lloyd Doolin. This is a self-published work, and the author sent me an ARC many, many months ago, and I finally got to it. Unfortunately, this book didn't work for me for a few reasons. The biggest one is when I was praising recently the Rift War Saga by Raymond E. Feist, I talked about what I really liked is the fact that each installment told its own story while still telling the overarching story. And I didn't feel this book told a complete story. I feel that this is along the lines of, this is probably a trilogy that's just broken up into 3 parts rather than 3 books that form a trilogy. So that was one part of the book that didn't work for me. The other thing is just, I had a problem structurally with this book. We had seemingly dual storylines going on. We had the present storyline and one in the past, where the character in the present storyline is telling his pupil about this past storyline. And it started off, there were some really interesting parallels that I liked. Like some teacher-student relationships in both of them, and I thought there was going to be just some really cool interconnection between them, and it didn't really happen. The past storyline kind of overwhelmed the present storyline, which was fine because, frankly, it was more compelling, but it got to the point where it overwhelmed the present storyline so much that I wondered why the present storyline even needed to be there. Additionally, because we know that there is a present storyline, I found that there was just zero suspense in the past storyline. And there was a convergence at the end, but it was so minimal that I just found the 2 storylines kind of pointless as far as being there together. A few aspects of this book that I did like the writing. I did like the characterization, especially of the main character. The magic system was very interesting, especially as we got a really big reveal and a plot twist at about 90% of the story. I really liked that. That aspect of the world building was really well done. I'm not a big hard magic fan, but when it's done well, I appreciate it. And I think fans of that kind of magic will like it. I also felt that on the flip side of the world building, I wanted more of kind of the main character is part of an oppressed people, an occupied nation, and we didn't get much about the oppressors. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say they were like, the snarling, mustache twirling type of villains, but they were just very minimally depicted, and I kind of wanted more of that. So overall, this book just didn't work for me. I'm in the minority. I see especially a lot of 4-star reviews for this book, so I know that my experience is mine and mine alone, so I don't want to dissuade any of you from reading this book. Maybe check out some other reviews because it seems like I'm kind of the dissenting opinion here. But for me, No Heart for a Thief didn't work. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Up next is a work of science fiction, and that is Solaris by Stanislav Lem. This was the book that Jonathan from Words in Time chose for me last month. And the first thing I have to say is I still just marvel at how well science fiction authors can tell a great story in this. I mean, this is like 200 pages. And this was a full story with great characterization, great ideas, just conceptually a home run of a book. And to do it so concisely, I just marvel at how science fiction authors can do that. So the thing I love most about this is kind of a discussion between, it's kind of a first contact type of story where our main character goes to this planet, and this planet, the ocean is kind of a sentient being, and the ocean has ways of trying to communicate. We think, because we don't know, because that's part of the book, is kind of the discovery of this kind of communication between the sentient planet and the humanoids, or just humans. I don't know why I said humanoids. And I really liked that aspect of it because it was so thought-provoking. I also like the ways it was depicted. When Jonathan recommended this to me, he talked about some horror vibes, and I felt it especially early on. The one thing that horror authors do very well, like my man Stephen King, is they're so good at atmosphere, and this was so well done atmospherically at the beginning. Just painted that picture, and it was suspenseful and a little creepy at times. And I really like that aspect of it because you're reading and you're kind of on eggshells a little bit, just wondering where the story's going to go. And except for a couple of info dumps, there were 2 chapters where it was just basically the character like studying in a library trying to figure out what's going on, that I thought halted the narrative big time. I thought it really hurt things. Besides that, this was a really quick-paced read with a lot of ideas that I'm still kind of, decompressing about. And that's the one thing I love most about science fiction. That's why I'm glad I read this, because the best works of science fiction cause you to think about the ideas, because that's really what they're about, is these big concepts. And the big concept here that I continue to think about is just, what is sentience? And for me, this was a really, really great book. I gave Solaris by Stanislav Lem a 4 out of 5. Up next is a work of magical realism, Killing Commendatore by Haruki Murakami. Murakami is a top 10 author for me. Big fan of his work. His brand of magical realism is one of the most unique reading experiences you'll get anywhere. Now, I did a reading vlog for this, so I'm going to be kind of brief with this and just give the overall scope of the story. This is about a man who is going through a divorce. He's an artist, and what he does is he basically rents this house kind of in the mountains and just kind of secludes himself, teaches some art classes, and just kind of has to get through the process of going through this divorce. And he's befriended by one of his neighbors, and it's kind of a small tale, not a short tale, but kind of a small tale because the characters are few and far between. And what I enjoyed a lot about this was just the interplay of the relationships between the characters, between the main character and this neighbor. And then there's some other people that come into the story later that I won't bring up because of spoiler reasons. But I loved that interplay. The other thing I love, and one of the reasons I always connect so much with Murakami, is he is such an advocate and connoisseur, and he's just appreciative of the arts. So his books are always just full of classical music, jazz music references that appeal to me as a musician. But in this one, because it's an artist, there's a lot of references to the visual arts and even the craft, as this character's rediscovering, producing art of his own in this, in this cottage in the woods. He talks about the craft, and it felt very real to me. And I'll talk in a minute about Murakami and how he knows what he's talking about in these areas. But one thing I always like is hearing artists talk about their craft. And even though this was a fictional artist, I enjoyed that aspect of the book. The ending didn't quite land for me. At the end, the magical elements kind of overwhelmed the story, and I found them less interesting than the human elements in the case of this book. But overall, very, very good book. I'll have a lot of great memories for this because I was reading so much of this just on trains, on the Shinkansen in Japan, and I'll bring back memories of that memorable trip that I took a few weeks ago. But overall, I gave Killing Commendatore by Haruki Murakami a 4 out of 5. Now, when you see my Murakami vlog, you'll see that I went to the largest English bookstore in Tokyo, and they have a shrine to Murakami there, basically. And I picked up another one. I picked up Absolutely on Music, Conversations with Seiji Ozawa, who is a Japanese orchestral conductor who I have the highest esteem. He was one of the best. Handpicked by Leonard Bernstein. I mean, just the accolades here. So this is a book that, I'll just say at the outset, this is a home run of a book. This is a 5-star book for me. But I don't know if it's a 5-star book for you. I have on this shelf right here about like 12 inches of books like this. Books of conductors talking about their craft, because that's what I do. Conversations with conductors, interviews with conductors, memoirs with conductors. And these conversations between Murakami and Ozawa were quite detailed because Murakami knows what he's talking about extremely well. He's not just a connoisseur of the arts. He knows his stuff. He does his research. He knows recordings. He contrasts different recordings of Brahms symphonies. And that allowed them to go into a lot of depth here that you wouldn't expect from just an author talking with an orchestral musician. So I love that. I mean, we had like 60 pages about Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto. We had about 100 pages about Johannes Brahms. So for me, this book was a home run. I don't know if it would be for you, but listen, if you have read this and you're not a professional musician like me, let me know, is this a home run for the non-musician? Because I'm really not sure. But for me, this was fantastic. I read this really, really quickly. I did read this in Japan as well. And this will bring back great memories from that trip as well. But absolutely on music, Conversations with Seiji Ozawa by Haruki Murakami, 5 out of 5. All right, another one I read on my Kindle, and this was just the very last one I squeezed in at the end of the month, was The Enemy by Lee Child. This is the 8th of the Jack Reacher novels, and the 7 were kind of chronological, and the 8th one's kind of a prequel, because it goes back to Reacher's time when he was in the Army and he was in the military police. So the first 80% of this was just absolutely perfect plot, perfect pacing, storytelling. Everything you would want from a crime procedural standpoint. Absolutely great. The ending wasn't quite working for me until the last chapter, just one of those wow moments. I mean, he went a direction and did something in the very end that I did not think was going to happen. But overall, this is one of the better Jack Reacher novels. There was a point, like books 2, 3, 4 in the series, I think I was almost ready to stop. And I'm glad I came back, because this one's probably like my third favorite of the 8th. I thought it was really, really strong. So I'll continue reading these. I used to read a lot of crime fiction, and I've kind of winnowed it down to just a few authors, but Lee Child is one of those authors I'll continue to read. So The Enemy by Lee Child, I gave a 4.5 out of 5. Okay, what is my book of the month? My book of the month was Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. I don't know if I have enough superlatives to tell you how wonderful this book is. So let me be a little hyperbolic and say that this may be the greatest coming-of-age tale I've ever read. It's at least a top 3. He is right up there with Stephen King as far as coming-of-age tale, because King is a master of that. What I loved most is Corey's 12 years old, and when you're that age, everything feels like a big deal. So in the story, no matter if it was a big deal, there's a murder and a dead body early in the book that permeates the entire story. That's huge, but even the small minutia that's not a big deal but would be a big deal to a 12-year-old feels like a big deal. And the way this is plotted and paced was just incredible. Each chapter kind of almost told like a short story, which was great. I felt like McCammon took his time with this book, but it also felt fast-paced because it was just slice of life, coming of age, but it felt like it was continually moving. So I read it on the Kindle, so I don't know how long it is, 500-600 pages, I would imagine. It felt like he wasn't in a hurry, but he was still moving the story along. I like how it was set in the 1960s. I think King's showed that that's one of the best times to set a coming-of-age tale because of in America, that's just such a tumultuous time in our history. We had all of the social upheavals going on, political upheavals. The country was changing quite a bit. And afterwards, there's a lot of nostalgia for the 60s. So it's a perfect setting. And that's the one thing I think I mentioned in my Goodreads review, that for me, a coming-of-age tale boils down to how much do I connect with the book? How much do I connect with the character? How much do I connect with the story? How much do I connect with the setting? And all 3 of those, 100% connection. Boy's Life is a masterpiece. I've read 3 truly great books this year. Swan Song, Boy's Life, and Lonesome Dove. So you can say Robert McCammon right now is the front runner for my author of the year. And I'm so glad that I picked up Boy's Life. If you've not read it, go. Go read it. It is so, so good. Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. Easy 5 out of 5. My book of the month, June 2023. Hey, so that was my June. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to talk with you in the comments section below. Just label any spoilers in case someone stumbles upon them and doesn't want to be spoiled about any of the great things about these things that I've read. I'd also love to hear what your book of the month was in June. Was it as great as mine? As great as Boy's Life? I hope it was. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.